Hello to everybody who's on Zoom and in the future on watching us on YouTube or wherever you find us. Welcome to the How to Run for Local Office workshop. We're going to go ahead and get started. You probably heard that this meeting is being recorded. So if you are in the room or on Zoom, just note that if you're visible or if you're asking any questions, those will appear. The chat is also being recorded for the record. You can also type questions in the chat. We may not be monitoring until we get a little closer to the end. But I think we'll go ahead and get started. All right. So welcome folks that are here in person. And so we are the three of us, currently SwissvaleYinz. If you see us on social media, that's who we are. My name is Miranda. Hollen. All right. And we are we've been doing this workshop for a number of years for local elections. So every year for the local elections, I think since 2019, we've done this. So 19, 21, 23, and 25 to try to encourage folks to run for local office. And we hope that you will, because we are we're in a part of our cycle in Swissvale, at least, where we have a number of positions open, and would like to encourage as many folks as possible to run for those. I think the more choice we have, the greater our democracy is, honestly. So I think that would be wonderful. I would also like to thank the library for hosting this. And then, of course, we're going to thank the folks on our panel as well. Some of our panelists are running a bit late, so I am going to introduce, at least for now, State Representative Abigail Salisbury, who is joining us in a busy schedule of getting ready and preparing for budget hearings pretty soon. So thank you very much for taking your time to do that. I'll talk a little bit about the agenda and format for today. So we are going to give an overview of the positions that are up for election. We're going to talk about getting on the ballot. We're going to go into campaigning, and then we are going to look at different resources that are available to help candidates, primarily for getting on the ballot, campaigning, and so on and so forth. So we have the format is basically we'll do a little presentation, and then we'll have questions for panelists to answer, and we'll kind of go back and forth like that through those different sections. So as kind of a reminder, we are focused on the borough aspect of things. There are a lot of municipalities in Pennsylvania. I'm not sure if we're quite number one, but we're pretty close to number one, at least in terms of the number of different municipalities we have in Pennsylvania. And so there are differences in running for office in each of those different types of municipalities, and differences in the ways that, or the duties of the folks that are elected to those positions. So it's important to note that most of what we're going to be talking about today is for positions that happen in a borough. The other thing is, with a borough, there is kind of, it's a weak mayor system, as in the mayor is not necessarily legislating at all. We're going to explain a lot more about what a mayor can do, but the mayor isn't typically voting on anything in the borough unless it's a tie, things like that. So this is important to note for boroughs. The other thing is, most of what we're doing in this presentation is all about boroughs that are kind of under the borough code. There is such a thing as a home rule system, where those municipalities can kind of change the way they run things. That doesn't have to necessarily be part of that borough code, but we are here in Swissvale, and so we are not home rule, and so we'll be talking about things kind of from that perspective. For the record, we also have the How to Run for Local Office guide, which those of you here in person have in front of you, and we'll go ahead and make sure everybody has the link to that. It's at SwissvaleYinz.org for the guide online. So just another quick reminder about what is up for election. And like I said, we'll go into greater detail on all of this. But we have a lot of different positions open here just in Swissvale and the Woodland Hills School District. And, you know, if you happen to find us online and you're in some other borough or district, we encourage you to go on and figure out what is up for election in your borough. So we have a number of current seats open. We have 4 borough council seats that are open, a mayor, tax collector, school board director, judges of elections, inspectors of elections, and there is 1 county council seat up for election as well. And taking a look at kind of how we know that and what the cycle is for running for local office. We made this handy chart for you so that you know we are there in 2025. So anything with an X on it is what is being what is open for election this time around. And so the municipal elections every 2 years. So the next one coming up, there will be many fewer seats open for up for election in the 2027 timeframe. So. Yes. Ooh, sorry, every 6 years. We will change that on there. Is that wrong? Yeah, okay. We'll get that to 2029. Awesome. So that is what is up for election. So we're going to take some time and go through each of the positions and just share a little bit about each of them. So I'm going to turn it over to Hollen for that.
Hello, everyone, and hi to you in the room. So I'm just going to give you kind of the lay of the land of each of the offices that's up for election this year, a little bit about eligibility, compensation, training, etc. So we have 7 total council members, and the term length is 4 years. Currently, our council members are Chris Ansel, Sean Alfonso Wells, Kevin Haynes, Josh Miser, Fred Quinn, Angela Stribling, and Brittany Swartzwelder. There are 4 seats up, and those are Sean's, Josh's, Fred's, and Angela's. So we are on odd year election cycles. So basically half the council turns over every 4 years or every 2 years. And eligibility, you have to be at least 18 years old, a registered elector, meaning registered to vote in your district, and then you have to be a resident of the borough for at least 1 year. And that's the same across most of the offices that we'll be talking about today. So as Miranda mentioned, Borough Council has a number of duties. They're the legislative body. They make decisions at council meetings on ordinances and resolutions. So in the past, they've decided things like urban agriculture, like chickens and bees decisions, non-discrimination policy. And then one of the most recent decisions was to buy the property at 2028 Noble Street. And I believe that's to lease it to the food bank. So they also deal a lot with money. They work with the borough manager to establish the budget. They set the tax rate. They pay our bills on garbage and road, or they pay our bills and provide municipal services, including garbage and roads. They deal with personnel, hiring and firing, Department of Public Works, police, fire, borough manager, things like that. There are a lot of positions within the council. The president presides over the meetings. There is a vice president, and then there's also committees. So those committees include finance, personnel, building, and public works. And then there are others listed on the website, but that just gives you a feel for, what's out there. And the time commitment, council meets twice a month, and those meetings go from like 1 to 2 hours. And beyond that, it's up to you how much you want to be involved and how much work you want to do. For compensation, that has been for many years $2,500 a year. So it's not meant to be a full-time job. But there is an ordinance in discussion, and this has been discussed at the most recent borough meeting, which is available on YouTube. And then the one before that. So if you're curious about the discussions, go back and watch those 2 meetings. But $2,500 per year currently, but the ordinance that's being proposed is to increase it to $4,190, so $4,190, starting in 2026. So it will, I think it's going to be voted on before February 15th in order for people to make their decisions about whether they're going to run. And then for training, there's a local government academy program, and we do recommend that you watch the meetings online. So we'll go to mayor. So we have mayor, of course, currently Deneen Swartzwelder. She was elected in 2005, and this office is up for election this year. Same requirements as for council: 18 years old, a registered voter in your district, and then you have to be a resident of the borough for at least a year. Like Miranda said, the mayor, we are on a weak mayor system, so the mayor is not doing legislation necessarily, but that doesn't mean that this is like a ceremonial office. There are some duties and privileges. So the mayor administers oaths of office. The mayor can vote to break ties in council, can call an emergency and take special actions. And the mayor administers the police department, even though they don't vote on hiring and firing of police personnel. They serve as a committee member, and they're involved in interviews and discipline. But those actions are reviewed by council. They can take part in council discussions, and our current mayor does. And they can sign all ordinances, or they sign all ordinances unless they're vetoing them. And those veto can be overruled by council at a majority +1. And mayors are able to perform marriages. So like the other offices, it is not a full-time job. There are 2 meetings per month, and then an active mayor can decide how much they want to do in addition to that. So I mentioned the discussions about compensation. So the mayor's current pay is $2,500 per year, but the discussions have it going up to $5,000. And so that's still up for a vote sometime before February 15th. So same training resources for mayors, the local government academy training program, and then watching meetings online. So the tax collector, we have 1 tax collector, and our current tax collector is Tom Barr. That office is up for election. Eligibility requirements are the same: 18 years old, registered to vote, 18 years old, registered to vote. And then in boroughs and townships, the tax collector cannot hold another elected municipal office. The tax collector does more work. So 20 hours per week is when the office is open. It's open currently Monday through Thursday from 10 to 3. That's the office down there on Washington. And then the tax collector collects municipal and school real estate and personal taxes. So the compensation for tax collectors is a little bit complicated, and it could also be increasing by February 15th. So if you're interested in this one, watch the last 2 meetings very carefully. So currently, overall, the compensation is around $38,600. But with the discussions that are in progress, it seems like, and this is based on the math that I have done from watching the council meetings, it seems like that compensation could go up to around $45,000 if the ordinance passes, because the tax collector is paid currently $9,600 by the borough, in addition to rent and expenses, which is just kind of a wash. And then gets about $16,000 from Woodland Hills School District, and then is compensated for collecting the garbage fees, which is currently around $13,000. And the conversations are about upping the $9,600 to $12,000, and then upping the garbage collection fees, because garbage collection is going up, upping that to $4 per bill, which is about a 25% increase over what's being done now. So it's a lot of detail. There is some training for tax collectors. The Municipal Tax Collector Qualification Program, which tax collectors take before the oath of office, and that happens within 60 days. And there's a detailed manual on the dced.pa.gov site. And it's important to note that you don't have to be a CPA or an accountant of any kind. You can qualify through training and experience. All right, judges of elections. So there are 11 total judges of elections in Swissvale, and that's one per district. And these are not staggered. So they do 4-year terms. So every 4 years, we elect 11 judges of elections. You have to be a registered voter in your district, and you have to be at least 18 years old. So judges of elections are responsible for running the polling places, picking up the voter registration binder, making sure the machines are working, swearing in the poll workers, and they are there from open to close. So it's long days on the primary and general election days. And then there are limited training hours outside of those election days. For compensation, judges of elections get about $150 per election day. It's slightly more than regular poll workers. And then the poll worker training for judges of elections is paid as well. There is also a detailed manual available about all the day of election duties. We're almost done. It's next to the last, I think. So there are 22 total inspectors of elections in Swissvale. That's 2 for each district, and they are majority and minority inspectors. These are also elected every 4 years, so they're not staggered either. And they're definitely elected offices, but sometimes they have to be filled by what's called curbside elections rather than the ballot. And I think that is because there's not a whole lot of people who run for these offices. You have to be a registered voter in your district, 18 years old. And the person who receives the most votes becomes the majority inspector, and the runner-up becomes the minority inspector, provided that there are people running. And the inspectors just assist the judge of elections. Time commitment, like the judge of elections, is the long days of primary election and general election. And then the compensation is about the same as poll workers, $150 per election day worked. And then the training is by the Allegheny County Elections Division, and that is paid. Okay, last one for the open offices. So the school board, Woodland Hills School District is huge. It covers 12 municipalities. And so there are 9 total members of the Woodland Hills School Board. We are in Region 2, which covers Braddock, Rankin, Swissvale, and Edgewood. And elections are every 2 years, and those are staggered as well. So there's 5 up for election, one election year, and then in 2 years, there will be 4. So there is 1 seat up available to SwissvaleYinz this cycle. Trying to think what else. You have to, same eligibility requirements, and it's important to note that it's not required that you have a child or family member who is a student at Woodland Hills. The time commitment, there are 2 official meetings per month, and there may be additional school district activities or meetings, but there's about 10 to 15 hours of work for an active school board member per month. And then you are not compensated for being a school board member. There is some online training via Woodland Hills, and you can watch the Woodland Hills School Board meetings on YouTube. And there's also a PA School Board Association website, which is in the materials on SwissvaleYinz.org. So that's a quick overview of the positions that are available this cycle. Yeah. Yeah, go for it.
All right, so it's time for a few questions for our panelists. Chardaè is not here, obviously, so we're gonna ask Jay. So we have not yet introduced Jay, so we will do that. Jay is a member of the Greens of Allegheny County and has run for some positions with that. So we're gonna ask Jay the first question as well. So first I'm going to have you guys unmute after I ask the question. You can, but it should pick them up pretty well. But yeah, if you want to move it while you're, yeah, it should be good. So the first question is, what have you learned? Obviously you have not, I don't believe you have served an elected position. Were you a judge, Jay?
I'm a judge of elections.
Yeah, okay.
Besides that, no.
Okay. So what have you learned about governance and public service, either while serving in a role or, in your pursuit of those roles? And you can go ahead and unmute there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I have never served in local government. I've observed a lot of local government meetings, and I think one big thing that sometimes I talk to people about is I think there's a lot of inertia. It's a lot easier to kind of like, I've observed elected officials sometimes, especially like in the old guard, they're trying to like keep their head down, kind of keep their, they don't want to stick their neck out for things, especially if people are kind of like upset about something. Maybe they think it's the right thing to do, but if people get upset, they kind of like back off pretty easily. So I feel like there's a lot of inertia in kind of maintaining the status quo. At least, I've mostly watched Edgewood Council. So that's definitely true for Edgewood Council. So that's like one thing I've really observed that I think people don't think about, that it's sort of just like things usually just keep going the way they have been going. And especially with how strong borough managers are. Borough managers often know way more than council people. And if you have the same borough manager, it kind of becomes less important who the council people are, or it can be less important. It really depends on who is on the council as well. So that's one of the big things I've noticed.
Great, thanks. And then I'm going to ask Abigail. As someone who has experienced local governance as both a council member and now as a state representative on the local government committee, what do you see as the most important qualities for a local government official to embody in order to be the most effective and maybe avoiding some of that inertia that Jay talked about?
I will use somebody else's description. Chris Ansel, who's the current president of Swissvale Council, said that I have a sense of entrepreneurship, which I guess fits because I've started and run 3 businesses. But I think what he means, or what we were talking about, is sort of seeking out projects to do, finding funding for them, doing new and innovative things. Because like you were talking earlier about, what your obligations are of showing up, and you can absolutely just show up. Like, this job is very much choose your own adventure. State rep is the same way, choose your own adventure. So if all you want to do is show up to meetings and go to your committees, that's fine. Actually, true story, we can't throw you off council if you don't show up. So we had people not show up and we censured them, and it doesn't make any difference. So you cannot get rid of people. One thing I will also mention, by the way, that was not listed as a criterion is you cannot have a felony and run for borough council. If you get a felony while you're on borough council, you can finish your term, but you cannot run for borough council if you have a felony. So, but yeah, I would say that quality of seeking out opportunities, looking for new things, like I would apply for grants for things. I would come up with new projects. We had Allegheny Goatscape come, we did the pollinator park, a variety of other different things, theater camps and stuff. I think those are opportunities that I think are interesting for people. You never know what's going to come up though, because like the borough building fell down 2 months after I became council president. So yeah, I was on council for 5 years total. And so 3 years after I'd been in, I'm on council and the borough building falls down. So now we have, I'm an attorney. I don't have any experience in construction of any sort, but now this is my job. So you just never really know what qualities are going to be required of you until they are required of you. So I would say part of that also would be flexibility. So if you have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit to make of the job what you want it, with also the flexibility to respond to the demands.
Awesome, thank you. You can go ahead and press that button again. Should be flashing? Yes. Awesome, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing those insights, and there will be more opportunity to hear from these folks as we continue to go along. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura to kind of go through some of the nitty-gritty of this.
Okay, So here's the point where we start getting into, someone has made the decision to do this. They picked the office that they're gonna run for, and now they actually have to get on the ballot and get votes. Here's some important dates on the 2025 calendar. Something to notice now before we get into what all this means is there's 3 weeks between the first day that you can circulate petitions and the deadline to file them. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind as we're talking about the timeline here. Okay, so I don't know if you guys would have had experience before with nomination petitions. Sometimes if you volunteer for a campaign, that you would have helped get signatures, but to appear on the Democratic or Republican ballot in the primary election, all candidates need to file a nomination petition along with some other paperwork, including a statement of financial interest with the County Board of Elections before the deadline. So that is like the how people get on the ballot. That's the main thing that happens. We are going to talk about third-party processes in a minute, but this is for major party candidates. So nomination petitions are documents that are signed by registered voters who must be enrolled members of the party in which you are seeking nomination. And they must reside in the electoral district of the office that you're seeking. So there are pretty like narrow definitions of who can sign your petition. It can't just be like people you know who are registered to vote. It has to be people who are qualified specifically for your petition. The people who sign the nomination petition are petitioning the County Board of Elections to put your name on the ballot. Like that's what it's for, and that's the purpose of the form. And there are a lot of instructions, there are a lot of rules, and our main piece of advice here is that whenever you pick up your form at the County Elections Board, you go through all of the instructions, all of the detailed instructions. There's a lot, including like making copies of these forms. You got to make sure that you make the copies correctly. You got to make sure you fill these out correctly. Signatures on your petition can be challenged, even though like that doesn't always happen at this level, but that is something that can happen. So those are kind of like the stakes for getting this right. For most of the offices that we're talking about here, you only need to get 10 signatures, which is like less than a lot of people think. They think that it's going to be like 100 and you're going to be like walking down the streets all day for weeks. And that's not really how this works. One weird exception is that inspectors of elections only need 5 signatures. So that's like, some people have that like in your house. But 10 is the minimum required number of signatures for most of the rest of these. So whenever you are going around with your petition, following the instructions, getting these signatures, you want to check with each one. Are these people currently registered to vote? A lot of times people think that they're registered to vote, but are like not 100% sure. So you can help them check. Sometimes people were registered to vote, but at an old address and not the one that you need them to be. So you just want to like actually be going through this with everyone while you're doing it to make sure that all of these signatures are valid. And then again, if they're registered in the party that you need them to be. Okay. These are the parts of the petition, which again, this is where those instructions on each petition really come in handy. Like they'll give you detailed information about what all of these mean and what you have to do or not do with each of the sections. I won't go through these all individually now, but there's some more information in our printed guides that are available online. Some things to point out though is that each person that you get a signature from, they need to sign their own name. They need to fill out their whole line themselves. Like you can't help them with any part of that. That needs to be something they do. And it needs to be witnessed by the circulator, which is the person who is getting these signatures. The circulator does not have to be the candidate themselves. That could be someone who's doing it for them, but each circulator has their own petition, like they're doing one for themselves and they're gonna need to sign and notarize each one that they do. And again, like this is a 3-week timeline, so you just kind of have to keep that in mind as you're planning out your time, knowing that you're gonna have to get some things notarized, you're gonna have to make copies of things. So you wanna budget all of that into the timeline here. Okay, so some things that are like true in general, but we can kind of talk specifically about Swissvale. Here is an example. People are gonna, for instance, want to write Pittsburgh all over your forms. You don't want them to write Pittsburgh on your forms. You want them to write the municipality in which you're running, or it can depend on the office. But for instance, if you're running for Swissvale Borough Council, you want them to write Swissvale on their form as their as where they live, as their address. You want to make sure that they're not writing their date of birth instead of the date that they're signing, things like that that are like just silly reasons for the signature not to be valid, and something that you can kind of guide through them. It's funny how like it doesn't feel like it would be a high stress situation, but then all of a sudden they're like writing wild things on the line and you're like, I can't use this. You don't want them to write ditto marks on anything. People love to do that, and then you have to stop them. That's even, I think, on the official instructions too. Like people, that is something that people get in trouble for. You want them to be as legible as possible, which like you're not going to teach people how to write again, but like as long as everything that they do can be read, then you should be okay. You want them to avoid nicknames. And again, you want to keep checking that they're a registered voter and they're a member of your party. You can get a voter list, which not all candidates for local office use, but is something that you can get that can help you guide where you're looking for signatures, depending on what your plans are and how much time you want to spend doing that. So here we're going to talk a little bit about running not as a Democratic nominee or a Republican. So big picture is that Pennsylvania has closed primaries, right? So at least for now, that means that only voters who are registered for a major party may participate in the primary election. So that has a big influence over third-party candidates getting on the ballot, because they're not on the ballot in the primaries, and that's not part of the process for them. So there are some other situations there, like independent and third-party voters can still participate in statewide referenda, local ballot initiatives, and special elections that coincide with the primaries. But as far as running for local offices go, they're not running in the primary. There is a lot of language to do with like what constitutes third parties, what are major and minor and independents. We're not going to get into all of that now, but that is something that if you are running as a third party, that it's good to know, and something that we might talk to you a little bit more about in a minute. You should make sure that if you are running under a party, then you contact that party before you take further action. So as far as what you're actually doing, we're talking about nomination papers for third-party candidates versus nomination petitions. Those are unfortunately like almost the same words, but they are different forms. And the timeline for getting those signatures is different. You can't start getting nomination paper signatures until after the nomination petition deadline. So the next day is when that starts. And then you have until August 1st to collect your signatures. The rules for how many signatures you need is also like weirdly complicated and difficult. But the rule is that candidates filing nomination papers must obtain signatures from qualified registered electors of the district in the amount equal to at least 2% of the largest entire vote cast for an elected candidate in the last election within that district. So that's something that you need to figure out. And we can talk more about that when we get to the questions here. There are also obviously write-in candidates. We're not going to talk about that too much right now, because that's basically like if you're not doing these steps is when you are a write-in candidate. Cross-filing is another kind of just thing to know about, even though it doesn't apply all the time. So cross-filing means that you're filing both as a Democrat and Republican, and that only applies to school directors within the candidates that we're talking about. Okay, we're gonna switch over to questions.
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a good excuse, and we'll try to get you out of here. So we are going to we'll introduce Chardaè, who is here now whenever we get to her question. So we have a couple of questions related to specifically collecting signatures. Actually, if you just keep that in the middle, it should pick up everybody. Yeah, it's a pretty good mic. So
Just the ones you get like right up on.
yeah. All right. Regular red line?
Yeah.
All right. So the question for Jay, because Jay is affiliated with a third party, tell us about collecting signatures as a third party candidate and what's the most challenging for you?
I think, well, definitely for council, like, I feel like talking to strangers is hard for people. That's definitely like, that's a skill that people vary at. If you're good at talking to strangers, like, you're going to be able to gather a ton of signatures, right? Oh, one easy mistake is if you get caught up in like a long conversation and you're trying to gather a lot of signatures, like that happens to me all the time, where like, I love talking about things that are related to what I'm gathering signatures for. So that really can cut down the number that you need. But for council seats where you don't need that many, that's really not an issue. And like, those conversations are probably like, that's part of probably why you're running, is like to talk about these issues. What is difficult? I think it's just difficult to put yourself out there. You need that entrepreneurial spirit you're talking about to go for it. And you have to just like, having this information is probably like 3/4 of the battle. The information that's being presented here, most people don't really know about the process, and knowing how kind of like simple it can be is that's really big. And I think procrastinating is probably like a big mistake too. Like, you don't want to be like waiting till the last week of a 3-week period, or like the last week of like a 4-month period or whatever it is. But I don't know, I'm a kind of a procrastinator, so that's the kind of thing that happens to me, and I'm just been slowly getting better at it. But we have our own specific forum, like this is for the Green Party. We have a 8.5 by 11, 8.5 by 14 form. It's nice to have a long clipboard, which we have a bunch of because we always use these long forms. And then I'd also say that there are really easy mistakes to make. Like, so, okay, this is for Judge of Elections. This is for Borough Council in Edgewood. These are 2 different forms. Like, these are completely different. And the reason is because one year the Green Party had minor party status, and one year the Green Party didn't have minor party status. If you mess up these forms, you're going to be removed from the ballot, or you could be removed from the ballot. So that, like, talking to someone who knows what they're doing is really big, I think, because there's a lot of easy mistakes that can be made. But also the county elections is really helpful too. They know what they're doing, and they will be able to answer a lot of questions. You can call them up, and they'll give you the right forms. So yeah, I think I didn't really get to the question exactly, but
making sure the petition is right is important, because there are people who have nothing better to do than look at petitions and show up to the Allegheny County Elections Office and be like, this one is wrong. I can't read this one. Like, people thrive off of that for some reason.
Ooh, I know one common mistake. Okay, so you see how this is printed on one side, not printed on the other side? That's because this is a photocopy. If you hand in something like this, like, you're going to be in trouble. You need to have both sides. They need to be printed on the right paper, and your recommendation of like getting the forms from the office is a good recommendation, because it's like easy to mess it up I've seen like so many different mess ups of petitions, printed on 8.5 by 11 for third party petitions, or like printed one-sided, or printed like a little askew. Like, those are all problems. Those are kind of all be problems.
Thanks, Jay. And then we have basically the same question for you. And you've had experience running for 2 different positions that you've obtained, the Braddock mayor and council member. So the question we have for you is like just about how you went about collecting signatures, and any questions you got from voters, or just your experiences in general with that.
I kind of eased into collecting signatures because before I ran for office, I was canvassing for other candidates. So people would see me twice a year, at least knocking on their door, and they would say, "Who are you telling me to vote for now?" Basically, my neighbors. And just putting yourself out there is half the battle. Like I like talking to strangers, so that's why I liked canvassing. And then eventually I was like, I guess I'm running for office. Can you vote for me? What would you like to see in the community type situation? And having those conversations, those intimate conversations, kind of helps build community and builds trust in the community members. You won't be able to accomplish it all, but being able to take the feedback and be like, I hear you, we're trying to do something about it, people appreciate that.
Awesome, thank you. So that's a bit about the getting petitions signed. Oh yes, thank you. Getting petitions signed, which can be a part of campaigning, is a part of campaigning, should be a part of campaigning, but then there you have this extra time where you can be campaigning. And so I'm going to turn it over to Laura to get us started with the campaigning overview, and then I'll take it from there.
Okay, so our main thing that we want to kind of say up top is that you're doing this like in your own neighborhood. It can be hard, like we were saying, just like talking to people, especially if that's not something that you normally feel comfortable with. But this is something that people can kind of like customize to what works best for their personality in a lot of ways, and make sure that it's not something that's like stressful or intimidating. It's just, if no one has heard your name before election day, then your chances are much lower of getting elected. So you can just think of about this as like introducing yourself to people that will be voting for you. So several of the next slides here, we're going to go through kind of quickly, but just to give you an idea of what kind of numbers we're talking about for these offices, because people don't always have a very clear sense of that. And I think it can be really helpful to kind of have these tangible numbers and imagine like the scale that we're talking about at these offices. Okay, so one thing to note as we go through these, we're not talking about a ton of voters, and we're not talking about a big margin between like the winners and the losers here, because a lot of these offices are for multiple seats. Like for instance, if you're running for council, then you're either running with the 4-person or the 3-person cycles, and it's just obviously whoever gets the most votes. And there's usually not that many more people than positions available running. And that can change based on like how people are feeling about like national politics, or just like if people have retired and new faces come in, and there's so many different factors that can influence that. Here's the 2023 primary to show the breakdown for votes then. And here's a overview of the last several years of primaries in odd number years. So I don't know if it's surprising or not surprising, like the numbers of votes that we're talking about for these candidates. I think that a lot of people do assume that it's more, but often voter turnout is much lower for municipal elections than in presidential election years, which is one factor here. And also it's just there's only so many registered voters in these districts. We're not talking about like countywide or higher, we're talking about like very, very, very local. So for school district, this is the last odd number election there. Okay, so about voter turnout. Swissvale voter turnout does tend to be pretty predictable, and it just depends on whether it's a presidential election year, a midterm year, or a municipal election year. I have this like very intense spreadsheet that I will send you if you want that has all of this data going back to 2016. But this little chart here kind of gives you an idea of the patterns that you can expect. In Swissvale, we have 11 voting districts like we were talking about before, and they all do have very different voter turnout numbers to each other. For instance, District 11, which is Regent Square, usually has the highest voter turnout. And they all have different number of registered voters within them too. Depending on how many votes or how many votes, but also even like how many signature petitions you want and where you're going and who you're talking to. You can, if it's like interesting to you, be strategic about which districts you're spending time in. A lot of candidates also tie in voter registration as part of their campaigns to make sure that they are increasing the number of people who can potentially vote for them and also just participate in the election in general. It's the thing to emphasize here is just a few votes could make a big difference, especially in low turnout elections. So it's important to know kind of what kind of margins we're looking at. Okay, I've got to turn it off to Miranda.
Yeah, so if you're really into using data, there's lots of data out there to use and to help you be strategic about where you spend your time campaigning. But you know, there's also kind of like the soft side of that, I guess you could say, and the not number side, which is you know, how you approach campaigning and what can be successful. And we'll hear from some of these folks in a second a little bit more about that. But just from our experience of kind of being involved in local elections in the last couple, you know, since at least 2017, if not, or 2019, if not before, for many of us, and just kind of paying attention to meetings and going to meetings and things like that, and paying attention to these candidacies. We have a little bit of additional advice and kind of how to go about things. So number one is don't be intimidated. I think Laura made this point that, you know, it can be really up to you and your personality and the way that you do this. And also that we're not talking about a huge number of numbers here. It can be intimidating in terms of, you know, making sure you get the signatures right, but there are lots of folks who can help with that and provide you advice on that. But the actual campaigning itself, definitely don't be intimidated. We recommend having, you know, one or two things that you care about and that you can tell voters that you care about. And, you know, maybe you type it up and hand it to people. We've seen some candidates do little door knocker cards. You can do that, you know, or, you know, send something out in the mail. But even just something typed up, half page to hand to people that lists kind of your priorities. And of course, that's something that, you know, you should make sure that's something that your office can control. And so there are things that local government doesn't do. There are things that state government doesn't do, that local government does. So you want to make sure, like we said, kind of go back and make sure that those are things that your office has some control over. And also, you know, look at, you know, chatting with stakeholders, perusing the old minutes, for example, or going through the old YouTubes of all of the different meetings for these organizations. Woodland Hills and Swissvale both have videos of their meetings. They both have minutes up there to see what the big issues are that are coming up. And so you have some time. There are a few meetings between now and petition day that you can, you know, look at those meetings and even attend those meetings in person if you haven't already, or at least attend online and see what the big issues are. So we definitely recommend doing that. And also seeing what the issues are in your community, you know, going to social media, seeing what people are talking about in the Facebook groups and things like that is certainly helpful as well. So yeah, so have a few topics that you know that you care about and things that are coming up, and, you know, have a succinct message or two that you can share with folks. Again, you know, collecting signatures is part of your campaigning for sure. And so use that time to do some campaigning. And, you know, if you're going out to collect signatures, you can also, you know, do some work online and say, hey, I have this, you know, petition. Will you help me get signatures signed? Things like that. Tap into your social networks that you already have. And definitely, you know, have a place that people can continue to get information about what you're doing. So when you are going out to collect signatures, if you have a website, if you have a Facebook page, you know, some way for people to get in touch with you, but then also collecting their information. You know, the petition might collect addresses, but it's not necessarily going to collect email addresses or phone numbers. If you want that from voters, make sure to collect it whenever you're there at their house, you know, getting your petition signed, or at an event, for example, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So yeah, so use the resources that you have, use that voter list to make the best use of your time, because that voter list, just so you know what it is, we didn't really describe that, basically shows who are registered voters in your area. It tells you what party they're registered for. It tells you if they voted in previous elections. It'll basically tell you if they're super voters or not. So some people really use that to hone in and decide, where am I going to spend my time? I might not go and knock on all the doors of the people who haven't voted in a long time. Maybe I'm going to knock on the doors of the people that have, or the opposite. Maybe you want to turn out new people and you do want to go to those places where people haven't voted in a while. So use those things strategically. And then of course, find out what previous successful candidates have done. And we have a few of those here. So we'll talk to them as well. Something else, so we're going to have kind of a fun event coming up, and we'll be getting the advertising out about that here pretty soon. But you know, there are some organizations like parties will host petition signing parties. We're nonpartisan, but what we want to do is to have an event where folks can come out, meet members of the community, get their petition signed, and also maybe have a little fun. So we've done things at Pub in the Park before, but this one's new for us. We're going to do a pub trivia on February 20th, which is just going to be a local government themed, really dorky and amazing. I'm so excited about it, and I might be the only one excited about it, but that's okay. So we're going to do that on February 20th. But candidates will have the opportunity, because that is right after you can pick up your petitions. Unfortunately, not for third party, but for the major parties, you can pick up your petitions. You can have people sign petitions. You can introduce yourself over the mic if you want. Maybe even host a round of the trivia if you want to. So we're planning at least one event, and you may want to look for other events where you can get petition signed or do a little bit of campaigning as well. If we do get more candidates, then there are positions open in the primary. We'll think about having a candidate forum. We have done that in the past several times. So we will look to do that again. And we'll make that decision once we know how many people are on the ballot. And you know, something that Laura mentioned again is name recognition. You don't want the first time somebody has heard of you to be when they're in the voting booth. So some candidates have done things like signs and postcards, social media, of course. Some have sought endorsements. So for example, the Swissvale Democratic Committee often holds endorsement meetings. I will tell you, sometimes it's hard if you're not on the inside already to find out when those things are, but I would encourage, you know, going to their social media, going to their, I'm not sure if they have an official website, but trying to get in touch with them if that is something that you're interested in, if you're interested in an endorsement. I would do that because they do on occasion put out things like a ballot or a slate card, they call them, encouraging people to vote for certain candidates that they endorse. So it can be a little extra name recognition. Sometimes in the past, mixed results on that. Sometimes they've put out signs well in advance of the election. Sometimes they haven't done signs. Sometimes they've only done a slate cards, but it's only been handed out the day of. So mixed results, but something that is available to you. So just so you know. Another thing we encourage, you know, there are multiple positions being run for right now for council and for And, there are multiple positions within the borough that are open. Teaming up with somebody who has similar beliefs to you and kind of, sharing resources and running together can be something that is successful. That's something that has happened here in Pittsburgh in the past for statewide elections, but I think there were some local council folks that kind of teamed up to run together at one point, or at least were on each other's, maybe that was the Democratic committee, on each other's slate cards. So that's something that you can think about doing, is teaming up with like-minded folks. And then for election day, that's kind of like your last chance to increase your name recognition. There are rules about where you can and cannot be, where your signs can and cannot be on election day. But generally speaking, candidates can stand outside the polls. Their signs can be outside of the polls, not inside or too close to the entrance. But you can be out there handing out your information, talking to voters at the polling places themselves. And in Swissvale, we have several of those, not 11 total, because sometimes we have some shared polling places, but you can get a friend to stand out there and talk to people too. So that's another thing that you can do as a candidate. These are all good things to do. Do you have to do all of them? No. It can be very low key, and you can make it what you want it to be. But we definitely, suggest there's some way that your name is recognized before election day itself. So we have a few questions for our panelists again. So I'm going to ask you guys to go ahead and unmute. And the first question is for State Representative Salisbury. Did you learn any lessons from campaigning for state office that might help a candidate for local office? Is that unmuted?
Yeah. So I ran the first time for state house in 22 and lost, and then I ran in the special election and won. So I got sworn in February 23rd. So February of 23. So I will say that I was not prepared for the radical difference between a local campaign and a district-wide campaign. So there's, just under 9,000 people in Swissvale versus like 64,000 people in a state house race or state house district. So I looked at, they showed numbers from previous elections up there where I was like, okay, I got 1,100 votes. So I looked up what the win number was, because that's really important, is to target your win number. So I looked up the win number for state rep, and it was like 7,000. And I thought, well, that's just like 7 times as much work. I can do that. And then I had never spent more than $249 on my local race, because then you don't have to file a campaign finance report. So I would just get my door hangers from Vistaprint or whatever and get 5-10 signs done. And so then turns out you need $100,000 to run for state rep. So I spent 45 the first time, which was definitely not enough. I was folding my own mailers in my office and stuff. So it was not viable. So I would say that the difference is, if you want to do a local council election, you can totally do it yourself. My husband and I just did it. I got the Democratic voters, because I was running as a Democrat. So I got the Democratic voters list who had voted in the Swissvale primary the last 2 times, and another 2 or 3 times, I think 2. So I narrowed that down, and it was 770 people. So I remember I got 800 door hangers, and then literally just went to everybody's house. So a lot of people did not campaign door to door here back then. I think that was pretty unusual to be campaigning. And then the 4 people who were in office were running as a block. So they all put their money all together. There are $249. Yeah. And then they all got stuff for themselves. So they got big, huge signs that they put on the side of the road and things like that. So my win number for the local race was, I think, 600, something like that. So, and I think people are just so surprised at that time that somebody was actually knocking doors and campaigning for borough council, because people do that now, but they just didn't do that then, that people were like, well, you showed up, you came to my house. But one thing I'll say that is consistent is people appreciate when you show up. Like people just like it's 80% of life is just showing up or whatever. So I think that's true whether you're talking about borough council or state rep. A lot of the showing up I do is virtual. Like this area is very Facebooky. So I'm on Facebook a lot. Like every morning I check, I have 13 municipalities and I've got like 30 different Facebook groups that I look at. So, because Swissvale's got, a zillion. Yeah. So I look at those, I see what's going on. And I used to do that in Swissvale too. Like if there's a pothole, then I'm going to text Greg Batchy and be like, hey, can you fix this pothole? And I laughed the other day because somebody posted on one of the groups, Abigail Salisbury is my favorite Swissvale council member. And I said, that's super sweet, but I haven't been on council for 2 years. But people just get used to you. Like they don't necessarily know what you do. They don't know what your job, like some people think I'm in Congress. They have no idea what my job is at all, but they know you as a human person. So I've had people say, oh, I voted for you because you give away lettuce on Buy Nothing. And I like that. That's nice of you. And I'm like, okay, like, whatever floats your boat. So I think that those are things like while the process and the money and all that stuff is very different, the fact that people want to, it's like in business where you say people want to know, like, and trust you. So if people feel like they know, like, and trust, they'll buy something from you. Or if people feel like they know, like, and trust you, they might want to vote for you. So that's kind of what I go for, so not every elected official is going to rock up to the chili cook-off. Like I've lost so many chili cook-offs. I'm going to do it again this year too. So I think that, just sort of focus on like showing up, knowing people. And it was wild to me how much my circle really like expanded just because we lived here, but I didn't know that many people. So just, sounds dumb, but like get to know people.
That's great. And I mean, I don't want to take too much credit, but I think the first time we ran was before we were doing a lot of local election things. And so that has, maybe in part at least, had some effect on the campaigning, and maybe it's a little harder now. So I don't know, maybe that's a bad thing that we did, but I think, I think that is a good lesson, and something that I think is an improvement, because there really was a time in the past where there was absolutely no information about who was running for local office. There wasn't campaigning, there wasn't information out there. So hopefully that's an improvement, and people are used to seeing people now campaign for our local offices. So that's good. Question for Chardaè. So tell us about your campaign. How much time did you spend campaigning overall? And what else was involved in that?
I go to a lot of events, and apparently I go to a lot of events, and apparently I was campaigning before I knew I was campaigning. Sometimes I'll go to 3 events in one day, and I was like, that's normal. This is what people do. And it turns out when I announced that I was running for council or running for mayor, people had already seen my face and they've already seen me volunteering, and they were like, okay. I also hate math, so I didn't spend much money, but I spent mostly time in sweat equity campaigning, knocking on people's doors, going to the events, talking to people and saying, hey, how can we do this better in the community? And that's what it takes. If you have to be at 3 different events in one day and people are like, how are you doing this? When do you sleep is what people ask me, but just caring about the people and spending the time with them.
People say I go to a lot of stuff, but you're at all the same stuff.
Yeah. This is my second of 3 events.
And again, we appreciate you being here.
Okay, I'm not going to knock over the phone. I'm going to carefully slither it over. Okay, go ahead.
So for Jay, the question about money has come up. We didn't specifically address it, but if you do spend under $250, you do not have to do the campaign finance reporting. You've run for some higher level offices. Just out of curiosity, what do you think about spending for some of those campaigns? And did you do fundraising? Were you self-funded? How did that work for you?
Okay, yeah. So I ran for state house before, and I was doing a lot of like calling people to raise money, ask them to donate to my campaign. But for our borough council race, we raised like $1,000. And we got money from Green Party National. We got money from people in Edgewood who had supported Tara over the years. We did like a fundraiser event. And then we didn't have to spend all of the money because there were like basically there were exactly the number of candidates on the ballot as there were positions. So we didn't have to do like a lot of we were just like we don't need to spend all of this money to campaign. What we did spend it on though was like meet and greet events, oh, there's a question there about like, was it our own money or did we fundraise? There's like no way we would have asked our candidate at the time, now borough council person, to contribute her own money. Like, she's a renter. She just didn't have a lot of her own money. I think a lot of people run with their own money, but that was like not an option for our candidate. So it's like, and we promised her we would be raising the money for her to use. It like that was part of the like why she ran with us, So we just we just kind of we ask people to donate, and people believe in the things that she believes in, so they're willing to do so when you ask. And yeah, we had a campaign treasurer. We did file campaign finance reports because we were raising more than $250. And it's like it would be hard to do all of those things as one person. It's kind of a lot of work, especially like she's working multiple jobs. Like it's just there was just like no way she could have done it all by herself. So that's like it's helpful to have a team. I mean, it sounds like you're doing a lot of it by yourself or with one other person. But I don't know. I mean, just like people who know how to do it, it saves you a lot of trouble of like figuring it out. I think that's probably the big
You can't
thing.
afford to get it wrong.
Yeah.
Especially like I've known people who have turned their petitions in at the very last minute.
Yeah.
Which left them with no leeway to fix any of the corrected things that may have needed corrected.
Yeah. People have like a bad notarization stamp or something and they don't have time to fix it because they're turning it in at like 4:59 or whatever. Or then I remember somebody got struck off the Swissvale ballot because they forgot to turn in a copy to the borough. So follow the instructions. And there's also a finance statement to fill out, which is how I realized how much I was in student debt. I had to like actually face that reality when I filled that out. So.
But you really find out how wealthy other people are too.
Yes.
So that's really shocking.
Good points. Thank you. All right, so kind of been through campaigning a little bit. We just have a little bit more here about some resources. So I'm going to turn it back over to Hollen, and if you guys can mute that once again.
Yeah, so I'll go quickly through these because they are available at the bit.ly link and then also via SwissvaleYinz.org. But I'll point out a few things about some of the resources. So the first resource here, there are a lot of resources available for folks interested in running, and this is kind of a mix of interested in running and training as newly elected officials. So that local government academy course, they typically open registration. I think registration for this one opens November 4th, 2025. So like right after the election that opens. And we have missed the Pennsylvania Center for Women in Politics Ready to Run. That one was at the end of January, and it's typically like $75. So that would be like a self-pay kind of thing. And then there's a couple of other resources up there. The Allegheny County website has a lot of resources, mainly the requirements and how to run for, or information about running for public office. Boroughs.org is a really helpful website. And the roles and responsibilities pamphlet, it's a really detailed, just 4-page resource. The last page is mostly an ad for a self-watering planter, but it is a good resource. And then there are also like a lot of webinars and a few in-person trainings as well via boroughs.org. And these are old resources, but we went through and looked at them, and they're still pretty good. Especially the Governor Center for Local Government Services There are links in the materials, but it's dced.pa.gov. That handbook, it's 63 pages and it's really detailed with a good index. And then the elected official and local government resources, 24 pages. That it overlaps a little bit with the handbook. And then if you know of anything, or any of you know of anything, let us know. And you can DM us at SwissvaleYinz. And one thing to point out is that everything that we've shown here is nonpartisan. So that's it.
All right. So just kind of one more question for our panelists, and I'll tack on to this for these folks that are here with us. What resources do you recommend a potential candidate use to become familiar with the position or campaigning or anything like that? And if there's anything else you'd like to share with folks that are considering a run, now would be a great time to do that. So let's see, we haven't started with you yet, Chardaè, so maybe we'll start with you and go ahead and
as far as resources, I would recommend for anyone that's wanting to run or thinking about running is talk to your local elected official. There are many people on council, and sometimes some of them may not be nice, but some of them are really, really nice people, and our taxes go to them. So borrow their ear and see like, oh, how do I do this? Or how do I run for office? Ask them questions and hold them accountable so you can figure out where your tax money is going. People are the best resource.
Yeah. I would say the best resource is just watching the meetings of the thing you want to be on. So not to toot my own horn, but we got the meetings recorded and live streamed and like posted online when I was doing stuff on council. And so the advantage that you guys would have that I did not have is that you can sit and probably watch like a year's worth of meetings. And you can say this episode of Swissvale Council is wild. So yeah, so like you can binge watch, you can get like a blankie and a snack and
double speed.
Yeah, there you go. So I would, just to kind of familiarize yourself with things, because otherwise, I'm incredibly grateful that I had the local government experience before I went to the state house, because I would not have even like the foggiest of what was going on. I would look at the budget, which is online, to see what we spend money on. Because sometimes it's things you wouldn't think of or income from sources you wouldn't imagine. And so I think the biggest thing about the job is just to watch other people doing the job and see how they are doing it and how people are receiving it. So if you see somebody who's doing the job in a way that you don't care for, that might be what your campaign's about. So like so-and-so isn't doing such and such. Maybe that's your campaign, or maybe you run one single issue campaign. Maybe you want to get rid of the shrub at Monongahela and Schroyer. And that's the reason you are running for office. And that's what you put on all of your information. I don't know.
Really effective.
Single issue voters may be before you on that one. So I would just say, take advantage of the resources that are available to you. There's a lot more than there used to be. And just go for it, because like I said, it's a choose your own adventure once you get elected in a lot of ways.
I would say, I feel like my biggest takeaway is like, don't do this alone. I feel like it always seems like a team sport, especially if like, you're not being paid to do it, you're a volunteer, you're doing it out of passion. I feel like that's been like the best way to fend off burnout. Like I remember like I was at this event like 6 years ago. But like if I was alone in that 6 years, there's no way I would be here now. So I would say don't do it alone. I really appreciate joining political organizations, but like particularly political organizations whose values match my values. That's been really important to me. And that's been really important for like continuing on, and I'm not burned out, even though it's been a long time. Yeah. So find your people. and then do it with them.
Also, make sure that you're doing it because you're passionate about it, because especially on the municipal level, you're not doing it for money because there really isn't any money in this. On Braddock Council, we make less than $100 a month. Even as mayor, it was less than $100 a month. So you have to be passionate about it or don't do it at all.
I think my direct deposit here was $181 a month. And then I always just ended up spending it on council stuff anyway. I remember I made those dirt kits when we did the worm program. And if they have like Oreos and pudding and gummy worms, but Laura made me get vegan gummy worms, which are really hard to find. I spent $300 on vegan. So my council money was always just like my fund money for whatever project I was doing on council. So.
Awesome. Thank you. Go ahead and mute for a second. So at this point, I'm curious if folks in the room have questions, but we'll have some concluding slides after that. So if you have questions for us, as folks who have tried to gather the resources, but also especially because you have these fine folks in front of you, if you have questions for them about running for office, anything come up for you, now is the time.
I have a question for Chardaè. You said that you did both. Were there differences between those two positions that make you think I would rather go back and run for this one over this one?
I ran for mayor because I didn't understand municipal government. And I was like, you can't break anything as mayor because it's a weak mayor system. And at the time, the only job of a mayor was to be the face of the community, break ties. And it was a six-member council at the time. And I got to oversee the police department, but that eventually phased out with our home rule charter. And I was like, this is a crash course being the mayor. You can't really break anything. And then moving on to council felt like a really nice gradual shift. I got to actually vote on things and make things happen in the community, as opposed to mayor, where they're like, the council is like the boss of the mayor in a weak mayor system.
I'm completely brain. My name is Reagan, by the way. Sorry for coming late. I would say, but I am a social worker student at Carla. I'm in my junior year, and I want to make a difference. I know I want to be able to go out and make different changes. I would say, so do you have any, I would say you was giving advice, but do you have any words of advice for somebody who is very brainy, but knows they want to make a difference and knows they can make a difference, but just need that little bit of support behind them?
I'd say volunteer. That's how I got a lot of my support systems. I just kept volunteering. And the joke was, when there was a vacancy for mayor, I kind of like volunteered myself into an appointment because I was already like working on the home rule charter. I was already doing so many different things in the community. But that's where you also find your support system, your village, because running for office is very taxing. And if you don't have a support system, it might not be the support system that you think it is, but the village is very important.
Anybody else have words of advice?
I would ask, how do you want to make a difference? Because that's such a big
statement.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Honestly, I would like to, my dream is to have my own nonprofit for children who either lost their parent to gun violence or drug abuse. And then I'll just continue from there. But for the Swissvale area, just to honestly, my son he goes to Edgewood and he plays baseball. So I always volunteer there, do coach rap and just giving back to the kids. But I also want to be able to let the children know that there is more to what they may think out there. Also just be able to let them have a little bit of sense of unity in the community. So let them feel as if they belong. Once they feel like they belong, they'll be able to, honestly give back to themselves. So it's like a chain of trickle effect. So if we give back to them, they give back to the community. We actually have more pride in the community. So just want to be able to try to build that community wise, and also just incorporate the children as well, so we can all try to.
So, I mean, just brainstorming off the top of my head, since I don't know if people could hear, who are listening, I'll sort of repeat the question. So if you want to make a difference, I'll say generally with kids, I would think back to like some things that I did on council would be, we had an artist in residence program that I started, and we did a theater camp for kids that was free, that otherwise would be rather expensive. So, you know, that gave kids an opportunity. And I remember some of the kids who did that said they did it because they wanted to get discovered and go and make movies down at Prairie Furnace. So that would be one option. I created this is a statewide program, but I implemented it here, the junior council member program. So you can bring kids in, they sit in on councils, you know, council meetings. They're obviously not going to vote or anything, but they learn about being an elected official that way. And then we've done things like with the pollinator park, we did things with the anaerobic food digester and the worm composting that got kids involved in like environmental issues in the area. So I think it kind of depends on, you know, what are you into? What connections do you have? I'm a nonprofit attorney, since you mentioned a nonprofit. I'm not shilling for business. I don't practice really anymore. I don't take clients. But I think that if you are like well entrenched in the nonprofit community, a lot of what I was able to do is because I just reached out to an organization that did that thing and asked them to come do me a favor. So like when we had Allegheny Goatscape, same thing, like, hey, can you just come do me a favor, whatever. So I think that networking in the nonprofit community is incredibly useful for generating ideas on how to, you know, do things. The question that you're going to have sometimes is going to be, how do you fund it? I mean, real talk, my answer is I usually paid for it myself, or I did something that was like a trade. So, you know, if I had something where I could do something that they needed, like the reason we got Allegheny Goatscape in Swissvale is because their horse trailer that they used to move the goats broke down. I own a horse trailer, so I let them use it for 2 weeks. So then they came and did a program in Swissvale. So, you know, sometimes there's something that you can work out that can be useful that way, but I think it just depends on whatever your own personal interests are. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'll just say, I think there's a lot of things to show up to, and showing up is nice to meet people, to contribute, like you were talking about volunteering. And then also it's a really good place to learn, like showing up to stuff is, you know, not just like educational programs, but any sort of event. And I always see things advertised online, but also like they're advertised like in coffee shops and stuff. I just feel like there's a lot going on that people aren't aware of, and it's not even because it's like they're not looking up or something like that.
Exactly.
So if you see something that's interested, I mean, I don't know how outgoing you are, but I know a lot of people, they see something and they don't go, right? It's like either they're looking for someone to go with them, and I guess they're just like pushing you to go alone. Don't be afraid to go alone. Because you'll meet people.
So I'm not afraid.
Okay. Well, don't be afraid to bring someone then.
It's like that Jim Carrey movie, Yes Man, I think it is, where he's told to say, like, he has to say yes to everything that he's invited to.
Mhm.
I sometimes feel like politics is that. One of my colleagues described being a state representative as being a professional event attender. So, you know, as I was at the ribbon cutting to Aldi this week, I definitely felt like a professional event attender. But I think that the more you get out there and meet people, my brain, at least the way that works, is try to match people up with, you know, needs and wants versus like what people have to try to reach out and see what you can put together, like fit the puzzle pieces together.
This is what I'm agenda for boards and commissions.
I was just I asked him about it. So I was going to say, in answer to your question, I think one of the things, actually it just came up in Swissvale, which is there are different boards and commissions in Swissvale, and this exists in other communities. So since you're here, that meet and decide or do things together as kind of a part of municipal government that aren't, they're not like the elected officials that run for election, but you like apply for them. So for example, they were just interviewing for like a recreation board person. And so that sounds like something that might be up your alley, working with kids. That recreation board, I know in the past has done things like organize like a game night down at Memorial Field and things like that. And I think Scrap has been involved in that. So, but that's definitely something. But yeah, as far as our panelists Cisco, any advice on getting involved in like any of those kinds of things that are kind of like affiliated with government, that, you know, might be for somebody who wants to do more, share more.
Yeah, just go to your council meetings, because that's where I first got involved, really, just being nosy. I would show up and I knew no one on council, but I was like, I don't know what's going on in my community. And I would like write what happened after the meeting and post it on Facebook. So like my friends and people in the community, like, this is what's going on in the community. And that's how I found out about a couple vacancies. And I would ask, like, how do you apply to these vacancies? Because I want to be on this board. And just being nosy is pretty much a skill at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't ask, you don't get. I made up a couple of committees for people when I was on council. So if somebody wanted to do a certain project, I'm like, sure. So I would say make it known what you want to do, because squeaky wheel gets the grease, but also figure out what's available. And a lot of it, you might not necessarily know what the different commissions do, like the civil service one, for instance. A lot of people see that and that sounds boring, but those are the people who vet the police that get hired by your municipalities. So it's actually a pretty important position, but people don't know what it is because it doesn't really say that. But, you know, if you're an environmental person, maybe you want to do a shade tree or whatever it might be, work with kids, might do on a rec board. Like there's a lot of different options. Or if you have your own idea, like we created a historical one here, like if you have your own idea, just come to council and tell them you want to do a thing.
I'll say some of those commissions are secretly very powerful, like ones that you've never heard of. Zoning board, like that can make or break projects, like full on projects, and you don't even know who's on your zoning board oftentimes. Like just now in Pittsburgh, there was like an 11-hour meeting at the planning commission. And that's like, you know, so it can be really important. But it's very important, but also it can be relatively easy to be like assigned to it, you know? So there's like a big gap in that.
It's like our zoning board in Braddock. They actually paid them to be on the zoning board because it's an important, it's one of those important boards. I don't know how they picked which ones were paid and which ones were not paid.
No, I didn't know that.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, then just a few things to wrap up with. One is a reminder, and we might have talked about this after you or before you came in, that we will be doing pub trivia, who runs this town anyway, at Pub in the Park on February 20th. But this is specifically, yes, it's dorky fun for us, but specifically for those folks who are interested in running or who are running, who have, you know, gotten their petitions to get signed. You can come to that event, bring your petitions. You'll have an opportunity to introduce yourself. You can even host a trivia round if you would like. There is a way to register for that if you're a candidate who wants to do that. It's at the QR code, and we'll send that out as well again. And then just in general, I'll just throw up the other QR code, which is for this guide that we handed you today. There are more electronic resources online as well on our website on SwissvaleYinz.org under the elections segment or the government section there that you can find those resources. But bottom line, we hope you're on for something. We hope everybody does. As I was saying in the beginning, I think that you know, the more choice we have and the more voices that we have out there from various folks in Swissvale, and or if you're in another borough and in those other boroughs or in the school district, for example, the more choice there is, you know, the better residents can be engaged in voting and having a reason to vote and getting out there and voting. Yeah, we'll be really excited to hopefully get a lot of candidates running in this cycle. Like we said, there are 4 council positions open, a mayor, a school board position. So lots of potential out there to run for something. I think I didn't mention again, if we do have more candidates than there are positions in the primary we're in the general, we will likely do a candidate forum and perhaps put out a guide to voting in Swissvale. So if you are a candidate, look out for that. We will be getting in touch with you for that. So, but thank you all for coming. Thanks to those folks joining us on Zoom and watching us later on. And yeah, I think I will go ahead and stop our recording and stop our Zoom for now. But also, I would be remiss without saying again, thank you to the panelists here who have joined us on a busy day and busy times for everybody. So thank you very much.